Right, today we're going to start talking about quadrilaterals. And if you look at that first part, quad means four, lateral actually means line. So it is a shape that has line segments that form four sides. So yesterday we talked about polygons. And remember, polygons, these are all polygons because they're flat, they're closed, and they're made of straight lines, at least three line segments. All of these have four. Okay? So let's first of all talk about this first one. This first one is called a square. That means that all the sides are the same length. They're all the same. All right, let's talk about what they're called. I can call it a square, first of all. I can call it a rectangle because all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. All right, so square, rectangle. I can also call this a rhombus. I can also call this a parallelogram. And finally, I can call it a quadrilateral. So, a square really has a lot of names. I can call it a square, I can call it a rectangle, a rhombus, a parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. Okay? Now, let's list the attributes for this square. And I'm going to turn my paper so I can write. I'm having a little bit of a problem today with writing. So, the attributes of this square, and I'm just going to bullet them. First is that it has two pairs of parallel lines. Now, what do you think parallel line means? Parallel lines are two lines that do not touch each other. So here and here. Here's a pair of parallel lines, and here's a pair of parallel lines. So that's two pairs of parallel lines. It has four right angles. And remember, angles like the corner of a sheet of paper. It has four. And most of the time when you see a square and a rectangle that have 90-degree angles, they'll have these little boxes in the corners. And that shows that it is a right angle. So we've got two pairs of parallel lines, four right angles. All right. It also has four line segments. And guess what? Four vertices, 4 points, 4 endpoints. So like I said earlier with polygons, and like I said earlier with attributes, if it's four-sided, it's got four angles, four vertices, four sides. Okay? So, now, my question to you, are these all of the attributes that I can use to describe this? No, it's a polygon. It is a polygon. It's flat. I could say it's flat. I could say it's plane. I could also say that it is closed. So those describe it too. The next quadrilateral that I want to talk about is the rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and I want you to look at this. 1, 2. So it has two pairs of parallel lines. Now look at that. Two pairs over here, two pairs over here. Okay? It also has four right angles. But there's something that we forgot to list over here. Over here, we forgot to list that it has four sides that are equal. So a square, all the sides of a square are equal. On a rectangle, only two pairs are equal. Two pairs equal here and two pairs equal here. So two pairs of parallel lines like the first, four right angles. I could continue and say 4 vertices, 4 endpoints, and so on, 4 line segments, but the line segments are not all the same. 2 are the same, and the other 2 are the same. So this is definitely a rectangle. Now, let's talk about what we call a rectangle. A rectangle, I can call it a rectangle. I cannot call it a square because rectangles are not squares. Squares can be called rectangles, but rectangles cannot be called squares. I can call it a rectangle, and I can call it a parallelogram, and I can call it a quadrilateral. Now, can I call it a polygon? Yes, I can call that a polygon because it's flat, it's closed, and it's made of straight lines. All right, let's talk about the next quadrilateral. This one, if you notice, let's talk about its attributes. It has 2 pairs of parallel lines. It has 2 pairs of parallel lines. But does it have right angles? No, it looks like a square that somebody sat on. This is actually called a rhombus. I can call it a rhombus, a parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. My handwriting is awful today. Now, I can call this a rhombus. I can call this a rectangle. I can call this a parallelogram. I can call this a quadrilateral. I cannot call this a square though, because squares have right angles. So with this, we're just going to say 4 angles. Okay? These are the only 2 that have right angles, the square and the rhombus, or the square and the rectangle. The rhombus, this is what we call a true rhombus. It looks like a kite. It is not made of right angles. Okay? But it has 4 lines, segments that are the same length. Same length. So just like the square, this rhombus, this true rhombus, has 4 sides that are the same length. Okay? Next thing, this is called a parallelogram. And if you look, it looks like a rectangle that somebody has sat on. It also does not have right angles, but it does have 4 angles. It has 2 pairs of parallel lines. Okay? I can call this a parallelogram, and I can call it a quadrilateral. I cannot call it a square, I cannot call it a rhombus, and I cannot call it a rectangle. Okay? And I know this seems confusing right now, but I will get to the back side of this to show you a cheat sheet. All right? The last quadrilateral that we're going to talk about is called the trapezoid. And the trapezoid, it only has 1 pair of parallel lines. 1 pair of parallel lines. All right, it has 4 angles, just like the rest of them. Sometimes it will have a right angle. For example, if I draw like this, that is also a trapezoid, but it has a right angle. This is what you're used to, okay? So a trapezoid, it can be called a trapezoid, and it can be called a quadrilateral, okay? So now I'm going to show you. Whoo, my handwriting is awful. I can't see. I'm going to show you the quadrilateral family tree. This is a cheat sheet. Okay? And I'm actually going to put this on the website and in Google Classroom to help you. Okay? So let's go through the cheat sheet. First of all, notice that trapezoids are over here and the rest of the quadrilaterals are over here. That's because trapezoids only have one pair of parallel lines. Pair means two. So 2, 2. It only has one pair. If I look back, if I was to continue going in this direction and in this direction, they meet. But this one and this one, they never meet. That's what we're talking about when we talk about parallel lines. Okay? So, quadrilaterals are all on their own branch because they only have one pair of parallel lines. However, the rest of them have two pairs of parallel lines. So let's go through them. Squares. I can call a square a rhombus. I can call it a rectangle. I can call it a parallelogram. And I can call it a quadrilateral. Got it? Next one, rhombus. I can call a rhombus a parallelogram and quadrilateral. I can't call this rhombus a square, and I can't call this rhombus a rectangle. I can't do that. And then parallelogram. Parallelogram, I can call these three things, these three quadrilaterals, parallelograms because they have two pairs of parallel lines. So, looking down here at this bottom, this cheat sheet, squares can be called a square, rectangle, rhombus, parallelogram, quadrilateral. But it can't be called a trapezoid because it has one pair of parallel lines where a square has two. Rectangles can be called a rectangle, parallelogram, and quadrilateral only. Rhombi, which is plural for rhombus, more than one, can be called a rhombus, a parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. And notice I see rhombus up here because this is a rhombus too. Because rhombi they have all the same side lengths. Every side is the same. But what sets them apart, what a square is apart, is because it has these square corners. They're at 90 degrees, like a corner of a sheet of paper. So if I've got a corner of a sheet of paper and it's a square sheet of paper, I can call it all of these except the trapezoid. All right, parallelograms can be called parallelogram and quadrilateral only. And then trapezoids can be called trapezoid and quadrilateral. Now tomorrow, we're going to go through some exercises where we compare and contrast these different shapes. I know it's confusing, but if you look and focus on this and focus on this page, and we talk about these attributes, it'll become more and more clear.